Hey everybody, Michael the Librarian of Magic here, finding and cataloging the magic and pointing you to it. Back once again here. Sorry it's been a little while, delayed about a week on producing this video. This is for all the content that came out on Friday the 3rd of January. Um, and I was delayed on making this video because I was in Walt Disney World in Orlando all of last week for celebrating the New Year and having a little trip, and it was excellent. And also, even though it was super magical and super awesome, and I had a wonderful trip, I also brought home a little bit of a bug from my trip, so I've spent the last week kind of recovering from a minor chest cold. So I finally gotten over that, and I watched all the stuff that I needed to catch up on for Disney Plus original content, and I'm ready to give my reactions and reviews of stuff, make this little video, even though it's a little bit late. So I'm going to dive right in. First off, we had a new episode of Pick of the Litter called Training Begins. Um, and the dogs that have finally passed into the Guide Dogs for the Blind intensive program have passed their health checks and all that stuff, and they begin the intensive training that they need to do to become guide dogs. And some of the dogs have, struggled a little bit more than others as it's gone along. There is one dog that most of them are doing pretty well. There's one dog that I want to say it's Pacino, who is kind of struggling a little bit more with like crossing, like stopping in the right spot at a crosswalk and stuff like that. Where like if he had been leading a blind person, he would have like stopped him in a weird spot, like let him out into the street or something. So he needs a little bit more time. They're going to keep working with him a little bit, but it's looking like he might be in danger of being having a career change. And then that's kind of the gist of this episode, is just seeing how they start going through this training. That's a little bit more intensive, getting them to behave the way they need to and do some of the tasks that they need to. This episode was a little bit better than the other ones because they've scaled back the artificial drama a little bit. It's still there, and as a result, this still isn't my favorite show in the world, and probably won't be. But it's interesting enough to watch the dogs and see, what they have to do and all that sort of stuff. That sort of keeps me remotely interested. But yeah, the artificial drama I don't need. And this episode actually kind of scales it back a little bit, so I appreciated that. If the show could strike this tone a little bit more often, then it would be much more palatable for me. But that's just sort of a personal preference, I guess. I just don't think it needs it. But anyway, that was this week. The dogs start their training. One of the dogs struggles, but they're gonna keep evaluating him and give him a little more time and see what they can do before they decide if they're gonna give him a career change or not. So that'll be coming up in future episodes, I guess. Forky asks a question. Forky asks, "What is cheese?" He wants to know what cheese is, and he gets help from Buttercup, the unicorn, who's voiced by Jeff Garlin, who has a pretty unmistakable voice. And this one's actually really funny because the unicorn starts confessing to Forky that like everybody in Bonnie's room is fed up with him asking his questions all the time, and he's just starting to annoy everybody. So Buttercup, the unicorn, decides to give Forky like a crash course on everything. So he lets him hop on his back and then has him run around, and he's downloading him with information galore, like just telling him, here's where the galaxies are and what the planets are, and you know, all kinds of information at once, so that he can answer all of his questions at once and stop bothering everybody. But of course that doesn't work because he still has more questions, and it's hilarious. So that is Forky Asks a Question. The Marvel Hero Project shows a young person named Jaira, the Radiant Jaira. And she lives in, I want to say, Chicago, if I'm remembering correctly. Uh, suburbs of Chicago in a village called Riverdale, actually. And JR is pretty special because she was inspired. She's in a fairly poor school where kids are like need financial help. But she noticed that there were some kids that were not always able to get their clothes cleaned or clothes washed, and it made them, suffer. Their performance suffered in school because of the way they felt about themselves and stuff. And that inspired her to do a free wash day at a laundromat in her community to raise money to do that. And it made like a big difference in their village, um, by getting people that don't have a washer and dryer at home or don't even have a home to be able to get their clothes cleaned and, just improve their sense of self-worth and everything like that. And then she was able to like learn from that experience to spur other fundraising efforts in her community, to help people in her community get things that they need, and have more community connection or community involvement. Like has a big heart for bringing people together and doing like community events and stuff like that. And the Marvel Hero Project recognized her, and it's really cool as always to see special young people in the world. Disney Family Sundays, they make memory balls from Inside Out. So they take these um, like clear ornament things, and then they tint them yellow to look sort of like the joyful memory things from Inside Out, and then they put like family pictures inside of them, so that there's like a positive, joyful memory, like inside the memory ball. So that's a really cool idea. That may be one that I would actually do, because when I was in Disney World just recently, my wife and I actually met Joy, and that was a very joyful memory. And that might be a really good one to put inside one of the memory balls. So I might do that, actually. That's kind of an interesting thing. So yeah, they tell you everything you need to do it, and maybe I'll produce one of those. I'm not sure, but that could be a cool idea. Um, let's see. Pixar in real life, there was actually a new one for the month of January called WALL-E Lost and Found, and they sort of build a real-sized, functional WALL-E and drop him in New York, like in the inner city, and he's like roving around, and people are looking at him. But then they do this setup thing, on this one street where they have like a area where people bring their trash out to the sidewalk. And there's a woman there looking through the trash, and she stops some people on the sidewalk, and she says, I lost my engagement ring, and I think it's in the garbage, but I need to root through here, but I want to go get some gloves from my apartment to keep myself clean. Can you just, like, watch this garbage for a second for me, so I can go grab these gloves? I'll be back in a minute, and I just don't want to lose my ring. So the people agree, and then while she leaves and they're waiting, the WALL-E robot comes out of this box, and they're like, whoa, there's like a real life robot. And then WALL-E is carrying the ring in his hand, and he gives them the ring. And then when she comes back, he's gone. And they're like, she's like, oh, you found the ring. And they're like, yeah, WALL-E came out and gave it to us. And she's like, what are you talking about? And they're like, a robot came out here. And she's like, well, I don't know about that, but thanks for finding my ring. And then that's like the funny setup. So it's kind of cool to see people interacting with WALL-E. And it's really cool that they built this full-size robot. That's like really awesome. It would be cool to see that like roving around a Disney park, or if you're ever one of those people in New York or something, it would be cool to see. So that was really fun. The Pixar in real life, they don't do them too often, but when they do, they're pretty interesting and fun to see people interacting with the Pixar characters. In High School Musical, the series, we got an episode called Opening Night, and I believe this is sort of like the beginning of a two-parter that's going to finish up in the next episode, which will probably end the season. And it's sort of going to be a two-part episode of them actually debuting their musical, High School Musical, the musical. And they're sort of thing that reels you in right away from the beginning of the episode. They show like curtain calls and everything, and then the stage manager comes and says, "We're ready for Troy to come to the stage." And you see the back of the Troy Bolton jersey, and then when it stands up, it's EJ instead of Ricky. So you wonder right away, like, how come Ricky isn't playing Troy? And the rest of the episode then goes back to the beginning of their opening night stuff, and excuse me. And there's all kinds of interesting things that happen, like Courtney is going to play the role that Gina was going to do because Gina is moved already to be, work because her mom works for FEMA and stuff. But then partway through the show, Gina actually comes back she's able to hop a train and sneak her way back to Utah. And they have Gina come into the show to do a dance number because Courtney is really great with the singing, but she's unsure about her dancing abilities. She knows she's not as good as Gina, but Gina agrees to step in the middle of the show and do that number. Everything's going pretty well considering they're performing in the gym instead of in the auditorium because it got all like burned. But everything's going pretty well, and then they get to Get Your Head in the Game, the basketball number with all the choreography and everything. And Ricky is still playing Troy for like the first half of the show. And then during that bit, he sees his mom's new boyfriend show up. He like shows up late, and then he like kisses his mom, and he gets all weird about it, and he fumbles through the rest of the number, and he's dropping the basketball and all that stuff, and then he's freaking out, and he really can't go on. So he kind of leaves, and that's when he gets EJ to agree, like, dude, just be Troy for the rest of the show. Something similar happens with Nene. In the last episode at the end, we see Courtney making a phone call on Nene's behalf about the performing arts program in Denver. And we find out in this episode that she actually called to try to get a scout from that place to come out and take a look at Nene. And so she does. She comes to the performance. And then she lets Nene know that, like, in the middle of the performance. And Nene's all freaked out, like, oh, this could be, like, my big shot, but I'm too nervous to do this. This is going to be bad. So she also freaks out, like, I can't go on and stuff. And that's kind of the end of the episode. There's bad stuff with the lighting, and Mr. Mazzara comes in and helps Big Red figure out the lighting stuff. As long as Miss Jen agrees to pass out robotics club flyers and everything like that. And Miss Jen has an awkward moment where she's still flirting with Ricky's dad, but then Ricky shows up with Ricky's mom. He meets her here. Miss Jen meets her for the first time. So there's all like this kind of inner relationship stuff. But it sort of leaves you on a cliffhanger because the next episode, which will probably be the season finale, will show you what happens in the second half of the show and how all this stuff revolves. So I'll be interested to see that. This has been a pretty cool show, and excuse me, still getting over that cold. It's interesting to see them finally performing their show and stuff like that. There was also another bit I forgot to mention where at the beginning of the show, they're kind of like, telling each other break a leg and stuff. And Ashlyn, who plays Miss Darbus, has been hitting it off with Big Red, and they've been flirting with each other and stuff. And so she kind of goes over to him and very clearly, flirts with him. Very clearly makes hits on him basically, and he doesn't respond to it for some weird reason. Like, I don't know if he's nervous or his mind's not in it or something, but he like gives her a high five when she's clearly looking for a hug, and it's like weird and awkward. So we'll see how all that stuff resolves, teenage love and all that stuff. But yeah, High School Musical, the musical, the series, that's been cool, and we'll see how this season ends. I think the next one's going to be the end of the season, episode 10 probably, but we'll see what happens with that. On Encore, there was a cast of Pippin from 1984 in Louisville, Kentucky, and that was, 30 plus years ago. And so these people are now in their early 50s, and they're by far the oldest cast. Well, not by far, but by, a handful of years for sure. I guess the next recent one would be 1990, so they were 6 years ahead of that, the next one up. So anyway, and Pippin is a pretty physical musical. It was choreographed by Bob Fosse, who was known for a lot of hip movements, jazz hand choreography, that kind of stuff. And so it's pretty challenging for anybody, but for getting people in their early 50s to move in ways they probably haven't in a really long time. They did a really good job. Pippin is one that I'm not. I know of it. I know about it and like what it's about, but I'm not super familiar with it. Um, and I'm like a movie musicals and musical theater type of person. But I'm not as familiar with Pippin. It's a little like avant-garde. Like it's pretty strange. It's very interesting that their high school even did it in the first place, especially in the early 80s, because it's pretty edgy and like abstract material for high schoolers, I think. But it was interesting to see that like a lot of this episode is about not just them getting a second chance as adults to like try to sing better or dance better or stuff like that, but also because like as adults they understand this material way differently than they ever possibly could have at 15 or 16 years old, because um, there's a lot in this material that's pretty adult in nature, and to be able to bring their experiences back into those roles, that's the interesting second chance thing of this episode, is to see a bunch of them realize like, oh, I understand this character way more than I did when I was 16 because I didn't have a clue. So that's a really interesting thing in this episode, to see them take more of an adult crack at this material. So that was in Encore. The World According to Jeff Goldblum, he investigates the world of coffee, and the sort of hook to this episode, I guess you could say, if you have been following it and if you're a Jeff Goldblum person and interested in his like very unique personality. Jeff Goldblum was a coffee drinker for quite a while and then gave it up like 5 years ago and hasn't had a drop of caffeine since. And in this episode, he has his first caffeine that he's had in 5 years, and you get to see the effects of that happen. So that's really interesting. And then, of course, he investigates the history of coffee and the different ways we make it and why we love it, and all of that stuff. So that's The World According to Jeff Goldblum. A very good episode. I think this actually, if I was trying to pick a few out of these to showcase this show to somebody who was on the fence about it or didn't know anything about it, this is one of the episodes that I would pick. Probably this and the ice cream episode, and maybe the barbecue. But I would say probably the coffee one for sure. I think is a good showcase of this whole show. So that's that. And then finally, in One Day at Disney, they did the shorts. They did a piece on Bob Iger, the CEO of the Walt Disney Company. This same segment was actually in the full hour-length documentary. So I think there are a few extended bits here and there, but for the most part, it's the same segment from the documentary. So if you've already seen that, then you've seen this segment. But it goes into Bob Iger's background, how he came up through sports broadcasting. He wanted to be a news anchor, but he realized he wasn't cut out for that. And then he got involved with sports broadcasting on ABC, and then got into the production side of everything. And then that's how he worked his way up through the Disney company and eventually became the CEO. So that's an interesting piece there if you're interested in the career of Bob Iger just a little bit. And that is all of the original content for this week on Disney Plus. Today, I'm actually recording this on a Friday when the new stuff has been released, so I'm going to try to jump back right into watching that content and make another video as soon as I can. Hopefully it won't be a week on that one, because I'm feeling a little bit better now, so I should probably be able to get back to producing some more video content. And that's all of that. One thing I did want to do at the end of this video that's kind of cool is I brought this treasure back from my trip to Walt Disney World. And this is a little Haunted Mansion treat that I was able to pick up. It comes in this little case here. And what it is one of the spirits from the Haunted Mansion in a jar. Their spirit has been trapped in a jar. This one is the Hatbox Ghost, and there are plenty of others you could choose from, like the Hitchhiking Ghost, Gus, Phineas, and the other one, Ezra, Gus, Phineas, and Ezra, and like a bunch of other ones that are all from the Haunted Mansion. But what's cool about it is you get a little death certificate because you've agreed to take one of the spirits home and take care of it. And I've written my wife and I's family name in there because we're the caretakers. And then it comes in its own little like casket box thing. And then if you take it out of here, I'll show you the jar. That's really neat. Let me move the box really quick. The jar says Haunted Mansion on the top, and it kind of comes with this cool, like, spirit stuff. There's this little trinket that comes with it. This one is a little hat box medallion, which I think there's a different one that comes with each ghost that you get. This one is the hat box one that goes in it, and then it tells you a little bit about the hat box ghost on the front. And then the coolest feature, if I turn the light off a little bit,
be sure to bring your death certificate.
so his spirit comes on, and then there's a bunch of little different little sayings and songs and stuff.
Family, friends, next of kin, summon a spirit from the mansion. Ghoulies travel from near and far, all invited to reside in a jar.
So that was a cool, like, Madame Leota thing. And it's just a really fun thing. The Haunted Mansion is my favorite attraction at the Magic Kingdom and Disneyland, both. And it was one of the few things in our trip that my wife and I did twice, that we stood in line for twice. Because it's so much fun and we both love it so much. So we decided to take a piece of it home with us and bring home the spirit of the Hatbox Ghost in a jar because we thought that was a really cool souvenir. And we got a bunch of other fun stuff and experiences and all that stuff too. But that was just a little piece of magic that I wanted to share with everybody from our trip. And, as a thanks for watching. Thank you for commenting and subscribing. Thanks as always for watching these. I hope you've had a great start to your new year. I hope it's been magical. I hope this gave you a little bit of extra magic in your day, and that this was entertaining and informative for you about all the Disney Plus stuff. So thanks as always for watching these, and I will see you in the next video. Until then, I hope you have an excellent week, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.